I lost my house to a tornado, so I knocked on my daughter's door, hoping for shelter. She looked me straight in the eye and said, "We want privacy." My dad. Her husband smirked, and my granddaughter was pulled away before she could hug me. It cut deeper than the storm itself, but I stayed silent, letting the ache sink in. What they didn't know was that I still carried a letter from my late wife, reminding me never to bow my head to betrayal. And when I overheard them whispering about papers in the dead of night, I realized they weren't just shutting me out. They were plotting against me. So what did I do next? That secret changed everything. Follow my story until the end, and tell me in the comments, what city are you watching from right now? The storm had a way of stripping the land bare, leaving behind silence heavier than the roar that had torn through it. Broken beams and shattered glass stretched across the place I once called home. That house had carried my life within its walls. Anita's laughter in the kitchen, the marks of Marla's height on the doorframe, every nail and board laid down with my own hands. Now it was nothing but rubble. A memory twisted by wind. Standing there, the smell of wet earth and splintered pine filled my chest with something close to grief but sharper. Anita wasn't there to hold my hand. She had always known how to guide me through loss. Yet tonight her absence was louder than the sirens that had screamed only hours ago. A man grows old thinking he has weathered the hardest storms, only to learn nature, and sometimes family, has different lessons waiting. I gathered what little I could salvage. A soaked photo album, its pages sticking together, and the worn Bible Anita had kept on her nightstand. That was all. The rest of my life had been scattered across the Missouri soil. My legs felt heavier than the years that had piled on my back, but one thought kept pushing me forward. Marla. My daughter would open her door. Wouldn't she? She'd see me standing there and remember who I was to her. By the time I reached her house, the night was thick, heavy with damp air and the far-off wail of another storm warning. My knuckles brushed the door before I had the strength to knock. Light spilled through the blinds, shadows moving inside. For a brief second, hope warmed me. The door creaked open, and there she stood. Marla, hair tied back, her face sharper than I remembered. Travis loomed behind her, arms crossed like a guard. My heart softened when Jonelle's little feet padded across the hardwood. She launched herself into me, tiny arms circling my waist. The warmth of her hug nearly undid me. "Grandpa," she whispered, face pressed against my coat. But just as quickly, Marla pulled her away. Her grip was firm, eyes flicking at Travis before settling on me. "We want privacy, my dad." The words landed colder than the rain still dripping off my jacket. I swallowed, searching her face for a trace of the girl I once rocked to sleep. Travis stepped forward, voice flat. "Space is tight here, you understand?" His eyes didn't blink. I nodded slowly, though my throat burned with things I didn't say. The man I had been all my life wanted to argue, to remind them of sacrifices they never saw. But the storm had already taken my home. I couldn't let anger take away the last bridge to my family. They let me in, but it wasn't welcome. Dinner was already on the table. I sat at the end, far from the warmth of conversation. Plates were passed, dishes clinking. Yet no one asked if I wanted seconds. The smell of roast chicken filled the room, but it had no taste in my mouth. I looked at Marla across the table. My mind traveled back to the night Anita and I built her crib, both of us laughing when the bolts wouldn't line up. We stayed up until dawn, finally falling asleep on the floor, proud of what we had built for her. That memory sat beside me now, unwanted at their table, a stranger in the house of my own daughter. Later, a blanket was tossed onto a narrow couch in the corner. I lay there, eyes tracing the ceiling shadows. Through the walls, Marla and Travis's voices slipped into the silence. At first a murmur, then sharper whispers. One word cut through. Papers. My ears strained, but the rest dissolved into muffled tones. The storm outside had passed, but inside these walls another was brewing, one that no shelter could keep out. I turned on my side, staring into the dark. The tornado had torn down wood and brick, but here, in this house, I began to fear something far worse was about to be torn apart. Family. The garage smelled faintly of oil and cardboard. Sleep had been impossible, and when morning light crept through the narrow window, Every ache in these old bones reminded that yesterday's storm hadn't been just about the wind. The memory of muffled voices, Marla and Travis talking about papers, still scratched at the back of the mind like a warning no one could yet name. By late morning, Marla called out with a flat tone that breakfast was ready. The invitation carried no warmth, just obligation. Walking back into the house felt less like returning to family, and more like stepping into a stranger's dining hall. A chair was set for me at the end of the table, far from the center where Marla, Travis, and Jonelle clustered together. No one said good morning. Plates clinked, silverware tapped, but no eyes met mine. Forks passed in front as if I weren't there at all. Bacon, eggs, and toast moved hand to hand, but never toward me unless I quietly reached across the table. The small talk flowed, work deadlines, Jonelle's piano recital, a new neighbor, but not once did anyone ask about the storm that took my home. The silence pressed heavy, and every bite chewed slow, harder to swallow. Memories rose uninvited, carving turkey at Thanksgiving, Anita smiling as Marla reached for seconds, Jonelle's laughter echoing in better days. Now it was as though those dinners had belonged to a different family entirely. Eyes wandered to the wall where photographs lined up in polished frames. Christmas mornings, birthdays, vacations to Florida, moments frozen in time. Yet my face was nowhere. I remembered holding Jonelle on her first Christmas morning, handing Marla a wrapped box at her anniversary, posing beside Travis when they bought their house. All those moments erased. The wall told a story where I had never existed. Jonelle's sweet voice broke the silence. "Mommy, why isn't Grandpa in the pictures?" Her innocent question froze the air. Marla's hand tightened on her fork. "Eat your eggs, honey," she said sharply. Her voice a blade meant to cut short the truth. Jonelle looked at me, puzzled, as if the answer should have been simple. The weight of being erased sank deep, like watching your life rewritten by your own child. After breakfast, Travis gestured casually toward the garage. "You can keep your things out there," he said. No offer to move them inside. No recognition that the garage was cold concrete with a thin blanket. Later that night, lying again on the stiff cot, voices seeped through the wall. This time, clearer. "We need those papers signed," Travis muttered. Marla answered with a sharp whisper. "He'll give in. He has nowhere else to go." The chest tightened, not just from age but from a realization. This wasn't simply about privacy or space. There was intent behind their words, a plan that had nothing to do with family love. The tornado had destroyed a house. My daughter's coldness was beginning to destroy the very idea of home. The garage smelled of dust and gasoline, a scent that clung to my clothes as Travis set a thin cot against the wall. A single bulb swung overhead, casting more shadows than light. Boxes labeled with old Christmas decorations leaned beside me, one corner torn open to reveal a broken angel figurine. Once, I had carried my family through storms and hardships with pride, giving them warmth and shelter. Now I was tucked into a corner like some forgotten relic. The cot squeaked under my weight. The blanket they gave me was thin, barely enough to fend off the chill sneaking in through the cracks around the garage door. Every creak of the house above reminded me I was no longer part of it. The thought sank heavy. I had built a home for my family, a place of comfort, and in return I was left in the cold. As I pulled the blanket tight, memories pressed in. I remembered the long nights at the factory when Marla was young. The machines roared, the air stank of oil, but I stayed for double shifts so she could attend the college she wanted. Anita, my late wife, used to leave me sandwiches wrapped in wax paper, kissed with her lipstick on the napkin. All those sacrifices felt like bricks I laid to build a better life for my daughter. Now, each brick seemed to crumble in her silence. The cold gnawed at my bones until a soft creak broke the silence. The garage door eased open, and a small shadow slipped inside. Jonelle. She held a folded blanket in her little arms, her voice a whisper. "I don't want you to be cold, Grandpa." The innocence in her eyes cut deeper than any cruelty I had endured. She tiptoed to the cot and tucked the blanket over me with the seriousness of a nurse. I wanted to weep, but instead I forced a smile. "Thank you, sweetheart. She leaned close, placed her tiny hand on mine, and whispered again, "Don't tell Mom." Then she scurried back inside before her absence was noticed. I gripped that blanket as if it were a lifeline. For a fleeting moment, warmth seeped into the room, not from the cloth but from the love of a child who hadn't yet learned to erase her grandfather. Later that night, voices drifted through the thin walls. At first, muffled, then sharper as my ears tuned to them. Marla's voice, clipped and impatient, Travis's tone, low and coaxing. One word stood out above the hum, "papers." Another followed, "signature." Then, clearer still, "house." My heart kicked hard against my ribs. The storm had taken my home, but their whispers hinted at a different theft, one wrapped in legal ink and betrayal. I lay still, straining to catch every syllable, my breath shallow. Each word was like a nail, hammering shut the coffin of trust I had once carried for them. I turned to the wall. The blanket Jonelle had given me clutched against my chest. Thoughts tumbled faster than I could catch them. Were they planning to strip me of what little I had left? Had my own daughter, the child I carried in my arms through fevers and nightmares, set her eyes not on family but on possession? Their laughter followed, cruel and careless, slicing through the night air. It wasn't the laughter of relief after surviving a storm. It was the laughter of conspirators confident in their plan. Sleep would not come. The cot felt harder, the air colder. Though Jonelle's blanket tried to shield me, I stared at the ceiling beams, wondering if this small act of kindness from a child would be the last I'd know under this roof. The storm outside had passed, but another storm brewed inside these walls, one that threatened more than timber and shingles. Morning came with a sharp stiffness in the back and a bitter taste of dust in the air. The cot in the garage had done little more than remind these old bones what comfort used to feel like. Thin light filtered through the dusty windows, cutting the darkness into pale streaks. The smell of oil and cardboard filled the space, as if I were nothing more than another box shoved into a forgotten corner. From the kitchen drifted the sound of clinking dishes, the rhythm of breakfast plates, and bursts of laughter. It was the kind of sound that once meant belonging, the kind of noise that wrapped a man in warmth. Now, it came muffled, closed off, as though I were listening through the walls of someone else's home. No one came to the door to call me in. The message was clear without a word spoken. I wasn't part of that table anymore. I sat up slowly, rubbing the ache out of my knees, and noticed something near the trash bin. At first it looked like just another piece of paper, but when I picked it up, my heart caught. It was a birthday card, Janelle's handwriting, her crayons pressed hard into the paper with the kind of joy only a child knows. The words "Happy Birthday, Grandpa" were still visible, though the card was crumpled, torn down the middle, and bent like it had been stepped on. A rush of memory swept in. Janelle had slipped that card into my hand with a smile not long ago, whispering like she was giving me treasure. I'd kept it close, a reminder that at least one soul in this house still saw me, and now here it was, tossed near the garbage, the paper weak from careless handling. It felt like more than paper had been ripped. It felt like history itself had been rewritten with indifference. I folded the broken card and slid it into my coat pocket, keeping the pieces like a man clings to proof that love once existed. A knock at the front door broke the silence. I straightened, curiosity pulling me closer. When the door creaked open, a familiar voice rang out. "Luther, you in there?" Eldon Vickers, my oldest friend, stood on the porch. His face carried the lines of worry, not just from the tornado that had torn through town, but from the absence of seeing me. He gripped my shoulder firmly. "Heard you lost the house. Damn storm took out half the neighborhood. I came as soon as I could." The words stung because they carried a truth I didn't want him to see. Pride welled up, building a mask. "I'm fine, Eldon. Just resting here a bit till I get things sorted. Nothing to worry about." He frowned, studying my eyes, as if trying to read the lines beneath. "Resting here? In the garage?" I forced a thin smile. "Temporary. You know me, always stubborn about getting back on my feet. I'll be fine." The lie sat heavy. What I wanted to say was that my daughter had turned me into a guest in the house I helped her build, A stranger in a family I'd carried through storms far worse than this, but the shame cut too deep. I couldn't hand him that truth. Not with Marla's laughter echoing from the kitchen like I wasn't even there. Before Eldon could press further, Marla appeared. Her voice carried a sharp edge that sliced through the fragile air. "Dad needs to rest now. We've got things to handle." She smiled thinly at Eldon, though her eyes told him to leave. He hesitated, glancing back at me, searching for something I couldn't give him. Then, with a reluctant nod, he stepped away, his boots crunching against the gravel until the sound faded down the street. The garage door shut, and the silence that followed was louder than any storm. My friend had come with open concern, and I had sent him away with a lie. Pride had won again, but the victory tasted bitter. That night, lying on the cot once more, the house settled into stillness. Through the thin walls, I caught voices again, low and deliberate. Travis's tone was uneasy. "Do you think he'll sign soon?" Marla's reply cut sharp and cold. "He won't even notice when the time comes." The words struck harder than any storm wind. My fists clenched under the blanket Janelle had once offered me, knuckles white with the weight of realization. The whispers weren't just idle talk. They were planning something. And the papers I'd overheard before were no longer a mystery. They were about me. In the darkness. I stared at the rafters above, heart pounding. The tornado had torn my house apart, but what my own daughter and her husband were plotting threatened to destroy something far deeper. The morning light slanted through the blinds, painting pale stripes across the garage floor. Dust motes floated in the beams, as if time itself had slowed in this space where I slept. The creak of the mailbox lid outside startled me upright. A faint thud of letters hitting the floor carried through the thin walls. For years, I'd looked forward to mail, holiday cards, utility bills that kept my name on a house I had built. Letters from Anita before she passed. But today, there was something in the sound that unsettled me. I shuffled to the front hall, stiff from another night on the cot. Marla was already there, crouched like a fox with her hand in the pile. My name, printed in block letters, stuck out from the top envelope. She slid it toward her side of the stack, but I caught it with a firmer grip than she expected. "That's mine," I said quietly. Her lips pressed tight. For a moment, I thought she'd argue, but she stepped back with a dismissive shrug. I opened the envelope with shaky hands. Inside was a notice from the bank, addressed to me. The words jumped like fire. Loan account, mortgage security, property lien, my property. The house now reduced to splinters by the tornado. Marla leaned on the wall, arms crossed. "Dad, it's just a mistake." Some clerical nonsense. Travis appeared from the kitchen, a mug in his hand. He spoke in that calm, slow voice he used when disciplining a child. "You don't need to stress over papers at your age. Banks send junk all the time. Leave it to us." The humiliation bit deeper than the words on the page. My age, my mind, my dignity, shrunk to something less than adult. I folded the paper neatly, even as my heart hammered against my ribs. Back in the garage, I sat on the edge of the cot and unfolded it again. No mistake. The numbers. The account tied to my name. I never signed anything. Not once. Still, there it was. Legal language binding me to a debt I had never agreed to. My thoughts drifted to nights long ago, working overtime at the factory to pay off the mortgage. Anita waiting up with coffee, proud of every dollar we kept honest. The idea that my name could be used like this twisted inside worse than the storm that took my roof. By evening, I joined them at the dinner table. The food was warm, but silence tasted stronger. Jonelle, bless her, chattered about school until her mother hushed her. Then, as if innocence could not be restrained, she blurted, "Mom said once Grandpa signs, we'll have more money for the house." Forks paused. Marla's glare could have frozen stone. Travis cleared his throat, muttered something about homework, and sent Jonelle off to her room. The air in that dining room thickened until it choked. I pushed back my chair, careful not to scrape the floor, and left without a word. Back in the garage, I slid the bank letter deep into my coat pocket. My pulse thudded in my ears. This wasn't just about being unwanted, it was about being used, stripped piece by piece until nothing remained. That night, lying beneath the thin blanket, I knew the truth. My signature, my trust, my dignity, everything I had left was on the line. They weren't waiting for me to grow old. They were planning to erase me now. Morning crept in through the narrow slit of the garage window, dust swirling like tiny ghosts in the sunbeam. The cot beneath me groaned as I pushed myself upright, bones aching from another night spent in this makeshift corner. I had salvaged a small trunk from the wreckage of my home, hidden here among boxes of forgotten tools and Christmas decorations. That trunk was one of the few pieces of my life the tornado hadn't scattered. Kneeling beside it, I brushed off the dirt clinging to its lid. The smell of damp earth still clung to the wood, a reminder of the storm that had left me homeless. My hands, rough and trembling, opened it slowly. Inside lay a bundle of cloth wrapped carefully around papers. My heart skipped when I recognized the handwriting on the top envelope. Anita. Her handwriting hadn't aged with her absence. It looked as though she had written it yesterday. My chest tightened as I unfolded the first letter. Her voice seemed to echo in my head as my eyes scanned the words. Luther, if you're reading this, I'm not there to tell you myself. Remember who you are. You've carried burdens for this family all your life. Do not let anyone erase that. Protect your dignity, even if it costs you comfort. Tears blurred the ink. She had always been stronger than I gave her credit for, even at the end when her body failed her. The letter wasn't long, but it carried a weight that pressed deep into me. My throat closed, and for a moment the garage melted away. I was back at her bedside, holding her hand, promising her I'd keep going. I folded the letter gently, pressing it to my lips. Anita's voice became a steadying anchor. For the first time since stepping into Marla's house, I felt something stir inside me, not just survival, but resolve. Later that afternoon, I wandered into the kitchen to refill a glass of water. On the counter sat an envelope embossed with silver trim. Curiosity pulled me closer. It was an invitation. You are cordially invited, followed by Marla and Travis's names. I scanned the text, heart sinking as I realized what it was. A formal gathering at their home. My name wasn't on it. I cleared my throat and asked softly, "What's this about?" Marla glanced up from slicing fruit, her tone flat. "It's not your kind of event, Dad. Just friends from Travis's work. Don't worry about it." The knife struck the cutting board with a sharp finality. I nodded slowly, swallowing down the sting. Not my kind of event. As though I had no place among them at all. Back in the garage, I sat with Anita's letter. I read it again, each word soaking deeper, like water into cracked soil. The humiliation of the morning burned hot, but her words cooled it with something stronger. Resolve. If they thought I was weak, disposable, or blind to what they whispered at night, they were mistaken. As darkness fell, I lingered near the garage door, the thin walls carrying sound from the living room. Travis's voice floated through, rehearsing a toast. "To our new home, our new life," he said proudly. As if speaking to a crowd, Marla's laugh followed, soft but sharp, like glass breaking underfoot. Cold spread through my veins. Their words confirmed what I had feared. The papers weren't just idle talk. They were planning a future built on stripping away what little I had left. I clutched Anita's letter to my chest, whispering into the shadows, "I won't let them take everything from me." The garage seemed colder that night, but inside, a fire began to burn. The morning light seeped through the dusty window of the garage, but instead of warmth, a kind of haze seemed to settle over everything. My head felt heavier than usual, a dull fog clinging to my thoughts. I shuffled toward the kitchen, expecting to see the small pill bottle Anita used to set by the sink when she was alive. It wasn't there. "Where are my pills?" The words came out softer than I intended, almost as if I was afraid of the answer. Marla stood by the counter, pouring herself coffee, her movements brisk and businesslike. Without turning to face me, she said, "Don't worry, Dad. I'll handle them from now on." "You don't need to fuss with all that." The way she said it was casual. But it wasn't a suggestion. Something inside me twisted. My medicine wasn't just routine, it was control over my own body. My health. Now it was another piece of me taken, handed over without my consent. I sank into a chair at the edge of the kitchen. The steam from her coffee drifted between us, but it felt like a wall. I remembered nights working double shifts. Anita waiting up with warm tea, making sure I didn't forget those same pills. Now my own daughter treated me like a child who couldn't be trusted with a bottle. By late morning, Travis came into the garage where I'd retreated, a too-practiced smile plastered on his face. "You should take it easy," he said, his voice honeyed but stiff. "Too much stress at your age. It can do real damage. We just want you safe." Safe. The word landed like a stone. I caught the undertone. It wasn't concern. It was a warning. A reminder to stay quiet, to stop asking questions. I nodded, because that was the safer answer. But inside, heat pooled in my chest. The phone rang in the house that afternoon. Marla answered at first, but when she realized it was for me, she handed the receiver over reluctantly. "Luther," a familiar voice said, rough with age but steady. It was Eldon Vickers, my old friend, one of the few who hadn't drifted away after Anita's passing. "I was at the town office this morning. Saw a document with your name on it. Looked like a property transfer. Did you sign something recently?" My knees almost buckled. "No," I whispered, gripping the phone tighter. "That's what I thought. The signature didn't look right. Figured you ought to know." His tone was cautious, as if he already suspected I wasn't safe to talk freely. I glanced toward the hallway. Marla and Travis weren't far. My throat tightened. "Thanks, Eldon." "I'll look into it." My words were clipped, my voice lower, trying to mask the storm inside me. After hanging up, I stared at my hands. They trembled, not from age this time, but from the knowledge that something foul was moving beneath the surface. That evening, Jonelle padded into the garage with her usual innocence, her small hands tugging at the hem of her shirt. "Grandpa, why don't you come to the new house?" I froze. "What new house?" "Sweetheart, the one Mommy and Daddy talk about," she said brightly. "They say once you sign, we'll all have more space." Her words cut deeper than any blade. I forced a smile, not wanting her to see the storm raging in me. "That's a conversation for grown-ups," I murmured, brushing her hair back gently. She nodded and skipped away, leaving me with the echo of her innocence colliding with the cruelty of her parents' plans. Later, when the house quieted, I gathered enough strength to confront Marla. She was in the kitchen again, her hands busy tidying the counter. "Why did you take my pills?" My voice was steady, though my insides churned. She turned slowly, her eyes cold. "If you want to stay under our roof, you'll do as we say." The words cracked against me like a whip. She didn't shout, didn't sneer. The calmness made it worse. It was final. Absolute. I walked back to the garage, my steps heavy but my mind sharper than it had been in days. In my pocket, Anita's letter was folded neatly, a reminder of who I was, what I had built, and what I still had the strength to protect. Lying down on the cot, I whispered to the shadows, "If they're forging my name, they'll regret underestimating me." The night air was heavy when I stepped up to Marla's front door. My knuckles hovered before I finally knocked, the sound small against the wide suburban porch. Jonelle opened it with the kind of joy only a child can muster, wrapping her arms around my waist before I even bent down. That small burst of warmth almost fooled me into thinking things had changed. But behind her, Marla and Travis waited, their faces painted with politeness so brittle it could snap with one wrong word. Inside, the table gleamed with dishes too carefully arranged. The smell of roast chicken filled the house, but it carried no comfort. They welcomed me with a smile, chairs pulled back, voices a little too sweet. Every word tasted rehearsed, as though they were staging a play for Jonel's benefit. I sat quietly, remembering Anita's soft reminder from years ago. Watch their eyes more than their lips. Their eyes darted, calculating, never resting too long on me. Travis steered the conversation, his voice smooth but sharp in its undertones. Dad, you must get tired handling things on your own. Managing paperwork at your age can't be simple. He chuckled as if it were harmless banter. Marla chimed in, her smile flawless. Oh, Travis, don't be unkind. My father has always been independent, even if it's harder now. Their words dripped with condescension, each syllable landing like a splinter. I kept my expression calm, my fork moving slowly, my dignity intact even as my stomach churned. Then Marla's mask slipped. I heard Gideon Carr was in town recently, she said, as if in passing. My chest tightened. They knew. Somehow, they'd caught wind of the legal steps Gideon and I had begun to discuss. The mention wasn't casual, it was a warning. Her eyes flicked toward me, daring me to react. I chewed slowly, set my fork down, and met her stare with silence. Inside, alarm bells clanged, but I let my face show nothing more than mild interest. It was Janelle, sweet Janelle, who broke the surface. Between bites of potatoes, she piped up. Mommy, didn't you and Daddy whisper about Grandpa's papers the other night? The fork slipped in Marla's hand. Travis coughed, nearly choking, before blurting, She's just making things up. Kids imagine all sorts of things. Marla's smile froze, her knuckles white around her napkin. The room turned brittle and still. My granddaughter's innocence had cracked their facade in half. I leaned back, my chair creaking under the silence. You know, I said softly, a man can look weak at the table, but that doesn't mean he isn't listening. The words weren't shouted. They didn't need to be. They carried weight heavier than volume. Travis shifted in his seat. Marla pressed her lips together. I let the air grow thick before I stood, laying my napkin gently on the table. Jonelle looked confused as I kissed the top of her head. Thank you for saving me a seat, sweetheart. Then I turned to the others. You've forgotten whose blood runs in this family, I told them, my voice firm but even, not rage, resolve. And then I left, stepping into the cool night before they could find words to throw after me. On the porch, my phone buzzed. A message from Gideon lit the screen. We're ready when you are. My hand tightened around the device, heart pounding not from fear but from anticipation. The time for quiet endurance was ending. The courthouse doors felt heavier than they should have, like I was pushing against the weight of the past 40 years of my life just to step inside. My knees ached, and every creak in them echoed louder than the squeak of the polished marble floor. Greene County Courthouse had stood longer than I had lived in Springfield. Yet this was my first time inside as a man dragged into a fight over his own blood and home. Across the lobby, Marla and Travis walked in as though they owned the place. Marla's blazer was crisp, her hair perfect, and Travis wore a tie too bright for the occasion, as though daring the world to challenge him. Their confidence hit me like a slap. I clutched the folded letter Anita had written to me years ago, tucked safe in my coat pocket. It was the only anchor I had left. Just tell the truth, Gideon murmured, steady as always. His voice was low, firm, a reminder that the truth, my truth, still had a chance. I nodded, my throat too tight for words. The opening arguments were a blur of legal jargon, but the message was plain. Marla's lawyer, a sharp-tongued man in his 40s, strutted in front of the judge and held up papers like relics of Holy Writ. My name was scrawled across them in bold ink. Mr. Parnell voluntarily transferred ownership of his property to his daughter and her husband, the lawyer declared. This was a well-considered decision, made with full awareness. My heart lurched. I wanted to shout, to stand and tear those papers apart with my bare hands, but I sat still, jaw clenched, letting my fingers dig into Anita's letter. It was the only thing keeping me steady. I scanned the faces in the courtroom, strangers, neighbors who'd heard whispers, a clerk I vaguely remembered. Each of them looked at me not as the man who'd built a home from nothing, but as an old fool who had given it away. The humiliation burned deeper than the lies. When Gideon rose, the room shifted. His calm presence quieted even the shuffling of papers. He didn't rush. He spoke in measured tones, dismantling each claim one brick at a time. "Mr. Parnell," Gideon said, turning to me, "did you ever sign these documents in the presence of your daughter or son-in-law?" My pulse throbbed in my ears. Every eye turned my way. I gripped the armrest, let out a slow breath, and answered with a voice steadier than I felt. "Never." The word cut through the air like a nail driven into oak. A murmur stirred in the gallery. The judge leaned forward, his brow furrowed, as though weighing my soul right there on the stand. Marla's lips pressed tight, her eyes narrowing. Travis adjusted his tie and stared hard at the table, refusing to meet my gaze. Then Gideon delivered the surprise. "I call Eldon Vickers to the stand." The courtroom gasped. My old friend, Eldon, walked in, hat in hand, his limp more pronounced than I remembered. I hadn't known he'd come. My chest tightened, torn between shame and gratitude. Eldon raised his hand, swore the oath, and then looked squarely at the judge. "I saw Marla and Travis," he said clearly. "It was late, close to midnight. They carried papers into the clerk's office, papers with Mr. Parnell's name on them. He wasn't there." A ripple moved through the room like wind through wheat. Even the judge's eyebrow arched in surprise. Marla shifted in her seat, her composure cracking for the first time. Travis's jaw clenched, but his eyes betrayed a flicker of panic. The tension reached its breaking point when Gideon presented my handwriting samples, letters I'd written to Anita years ago, grocery lists, even Jonelle's birthday cards, all submitted as evidence. My pen strokes, my familiar curves, every line born of my hand. The so-called deed in Marla's lawyer's folder didn't match, not even close. The silence was thick, broken only by the shuffle of the judge's papers. Then his voice cut through, stern and measured. "This will require deeper investigation." The gavel struck. The sound echoed in my bones. The courtroom erupted in whispers, faces turning from Marla and Travis to me, from suspicion to reconsideration. Marla's hand trembled as she clutched her blazer, while Travis's jaw set like concrete. A man cornered but not yet defeated. I didn't move. Instead, I pressed Anita's letter against my chest beneath the coat. Her words came back, written years ago but alive in me now. "Don't let anyone erase you." I whispered into the folds of the fabric. Words only for her and me. "Anita, your words will save me yet." The judge's gavel had adjourned the day, but the storm was only just beginning. The sunlight outside the courthouse felt harsher than it had inside. Maybe it was the weight lifted after the judge's words, or maybe it was the eyes of the crowd waiting on the steps. My knees ached with every step, but I straightened my back, refusing to show weakness. Gideon walked close at my side, murmuring, "Just keep moving, Mr. Parnell. Let the truth breathe." But there was no escaping the swarm. Reporters closed in, their microphones and cameras flashing. Voices collided. "Mr. Parnell, did you really sign the deed?" "Marla, what's your response to the forgery claims?" The chaos made the courthouse walls seem like a sanctuary I'd just abandoned. Then, with polished heels clicking against the stone, Marla and Travis pushed their way to the front. Their confidence was a performance, and the crowd became their stage. "Let me be clear," Marla declared, her voice sharp, cutting through the noise. "My father is confused. He's being manipulated by outsiders who want his property. He doesn't know what he's doing anymore." She didn't look at me once while saying it. She spoke as if I wasn't there, like I'd already been buried under the tornado rubble. Travis smirked, his words crueler than her polished lies. "Maybe you should have stayed under that debris, old man. Would have spared us all this circus." A murmur rippled through the crowd. My jaw tightened, but I kept my silence. Rage boiled under the surface, but Gideon's hand on my arm reminded me, dignity would be my sharpest weapon. So I stood tall and stared, letting their venom expose itself. And then came the voice that broke through it all. "Mommy?" Jonelle piped up, her small voice carrying further than anyone expected. "I saw you and Daddy practice Grandpa's name on paper." It was like lightning splitting the sky. The entire crowd gasped. Reporters scrambled closer. Neighbors' whispers turned into full-on chatter. My heart clenched, not just from the truth she'd blurted, but from the fear in her wide eyes as Marla's hand shot out, gripping her arm too tightly. "Jonelle," Marla hissed, her mask cracking. "That's enough." But it was too late. The words had already lodged themselves into every ear on those courthouse steps. Whispers grew into a steady current. "Did you hear that? She said they practiced his signature." "That's forgery." Gideon seized the moment, his voice rising above the murmur. "This isn't just a family dispute," he declared. "This is fraud, and it's happening in plain sight." For the first time, I saw Marla's composure falter. Her lips trembled as she tried to pull Jonelle closer. Travis, face red, tugged her arm. "We're leaving," he barked, dragging them both toward their car. The crowd parted for them, but not kindly. Eyes followed, heads shook, and the whispers grew louder. Their arrogance was bleeding out, leaving them raw. Jonelle twisted in her mother's grip, reaching toward me. "Grandpa," she cried, "don't let them—" Her words were cut short as Marla yanked her toward the car door. The sound of that small voice tore through me deeper than any lawyer's argument ever could. I took a single step forward and called out, steady and clear, "Jonelle, don't forget the truth. It will always matter." She looked back at me, eyes shimmering, before the door slammed shut and Travis's car pulled away. The crowd's attention shifted back to me, but my focus was elsewhere. Across the street, leaning against a lamppost, stood a stranger I hadn't noticed before, a man in a dark coat, holding a folder tight against his chest. He wasn't with the reporters. His eyes didn't dart like theirs. He just stared at me, calm, almost deliberate. When our eyes met, he gave the faintest nod, then turned away slowly, as if inviting me to follow. Something in my gut told me this wasn't chance. That folder, whatever was in it, wasn't just paper. It was weight. It was truth. And maybe, just maybe, it was the key to ending this storm once and for all. The motel room was quiet, the kind of quiet that made every memory louder. The thin curtains let in a tired light from the street lamp outside, and the hum of an old refrigerator filled the silence. Anita's letters lay spread on the small table like a lifeline. Her handwriting, looping and steady, carried a warmth that still reached me even after all these years. "Protect your dignity," she had written once. "Family should never mean surrendering your soul." The words felt like they were written for this very moment. I wondered if forgiveness was still a duty, or if it had become a trap. The phone buzzed beside me, breaking the stillness. Gideon's voice was steady on the other end. He suggested a meeting, a chance to face Marla and Travis without the courtroom's walls between us. Neutral ground, he promised. I hesitated, my stomach tight with dread, but Jonelle's face came to mind, her small hands clutching mine, her unfiltered honesty. For her sake, I agreed. The cafe was dimly lit, the air thick with roasted coffee and muffled conversations. I walked in with Gideon by my side. Marla sat upright, her posture rigid, her eyes darting toward the window as if she wished to escape. Travis lounged beside her, his arm draped over the chair in a display of false ease. When our eyes met, his smirk faltered for just a second. "I never wanted it to go this far," Marla said at last, her voice barely above a whisper. The words struck something deep in me, but then her gaze hardened, as if she had pulled a curtain back over herself. Travis leaned forward, his tone sharp, defensive. "Don't fall for this act," he said. "He's playing the victim." I stayed silent, letting my calm weigh heavier than their words. Then Jonelle appeared from behind Marla's chair, her eyes wide and uncertain. She slipped free, running to hug me. The warmth of her embrace was almost too much to bear. For the briefest moment, Marla's eyes softened. I caught a glimpse of the daughter I once knew, the child who used to clutch my hand at county fairs and whisper secrets only a father should hear. But the moment shattered when Travis touched her arm. Marla's face returned to stone. "You may be my blood," I said, finally breaking the silence. "But I won't let you bleed me dry." My voice didn't rise, but it carried weight. I saw Gideon's slight nod from the corner of my eye. This was the turning point. Anita's words guided me as surely as if she were in the room. Marla's lips trembled, then steadied. As she stood, she leaned close enough for only me to hear. "If you walk this path, Dad, you'll never see Jonelle again." The cafe air grew colder. I watched them leave. Jonelle's small face pressed against the window as the car pulled away. My heart clenched at the cruel ultimatum hanging in the air. My dignity and safety, or the last innocent bond I had left. The courthouse felt colder than any storm I had ever endured. The weight of the moment pressed down on my shoulders. But Gideon stood tall beside me. When the judge called us forward, the hush in the room was so sharp it cut through my bones. Then Gideon laid out the evidence, page after page, signature after signature, proving that Travis had forged my name. He spoke steady, deliberate, each word driving another nail into their coffin of lies. Travis's face drained of color, and Marla's mask of pride cracked into trembling silence. The fraud was undeniable. Gideon pointed to the bank records, the falsified deeds, the clerk's testimony that had matched Eldon's account. My name, written by another hand, became the rope that bound their scheme. Gasps rippled through the room when Gideon showed the comparison, my real handwriting beside Travis's poor imitation. For the first time in weeks, my heart found a rhythm that felt like strength, not fear. When the judge spoke, the finality of his voice echoed like thunder rolling through the courthouse. "The documents are fraudulent. The property remains in Mr. Luther Parnell's name. Restitution is ordered. Penalties will be applied." The words didn't restore my lost home, but they restored something more valuable, my dignity. Marla broke into tears, her voice shaking as she whispered, "I didn't mean for it to go this far." Yet even her apology was hollow, laced with excuses that no longer held weight. Travis sat motionless, jaw clenched, his arrogance finally broken under the weight of truth. As the gavel struck, the courtroom emptied with murmurs and whispers. I stood rooted, not in weakness, but in quiet triumph. I didn't need to raise my voice or curse their names. The truth had done the work for me. My silence, heavy with years of sacrifice, spoke louder than any defense they could have mounted. Outside, the sun dipped low, bathing the courthouse steps in a golden haze. Marla avoided my eyes, her pride shattered, her reputation in ruins. She tried to explain herself, but each word only revealed her greed. We thought it would be easier this way," she stammered. "Easier," she said, as though betrayal were a path to comfort. I turned from her, not out of hatred, but because I had no more to give. It was then that Jonelle tugged at my sleeve. Her little hand, trembling, pressed a folded note into my palm. She didn't say a word, her eyes said enough. Later, when I opened it, I found her careful handwriting. "Grandpa, I believe you. I'll come back to you when I can. I love you." My chest tightened. In that small scrap of paper, I found the anchor that Anita's voice had always been to me. Innocence still survived, even in the midst of betrayal. That evening, I walked to Anita's grave. The wind was calm, the grass freshly cut, the stone worn smooth by years. I knelt and placed Jonelle's note beside the flowers. "Anita," I whispered, "they tried to strip me of everything, but your words gave me strength. I stood tall, and the truth was louder than their lies. They couldn't take away who I am." I told her of the verdict, of Jonelle's quiet defiance, of the justice that had been served. My voice trembled, but not from weakness. These were the tears of a man who had carried burdens too long and finally set them down. The sky above me felt wider, freer. As I rose, the last light of day touched Anita's name. I whispered the words that had formed in my heart ever since the storm. I lost a house in the storm, but I saved my soul from theirs. And with that, I walked away, not broken but renewed. carrying the dignity of my years, the love of an innocent granddaughter, and the certainty that even when family turns to betrayal, integrity is the inheritance worth leaving behind.